Hello, we're just getting started here, and we'll wait a few more minutes for some people to join in. In the meantime, feel free to go ahead and start sending me your questions, and I will scribble some down as we're going. Hello, Belisa. Thank you for joining. We're just getting started. In the meantime, you can text a quick yes or no. Can you hear me? Great. Glad you joined. We're just getting started here, so we'll wait for a few people to come in, but if you do have any questions, go ahead and shoot them over to me, and I'm going to scribble them down as we're going along, and I'll try to get to as many as possible as we're doing the broadcast. Hello, young stoner. Welcome to my live Q&A session. Glad you're here. Feel free to begin asking me any questions as we go along. The only ground rule I have is I will not answer any vulgar or inappropriate questions. That's it. Other than that, it's free reign. Hello, Capelli. Glad you joined. Feel free to go ahead and start asking questions if you want. And that's what I'm here for, is to talk to you guys. And in the meantime, I do have a few questions that were emailed to me ahead of time. One person asked why I have such a strong logo and theme across all of my website and social media sites, especially a logo, because that feels very corporate. Well, I've been working in advertising for 20 years, and it's sort of a habit. And I also believe that, thank you for the hearts. By the way, yeah, tap your screen. You can tap it multiple times to send me hearts if you like what you're hearing, and also to boost my feed within Periscope. So yeah, I created the logo because I'm in marketing and advertising, and I think that it's important to give ourselves a brand, especially when we're sending out a message. I believe that because I'm speaking in the way that I am and I'm representing myself in the way that I am, it's important to show some sort of unity across all of my feeds. And the logo came about just on accident, sort of. I was thinking about how could I represent myself, and the little green circle underneath represents my part of my higher power structure, my spirituality, which is nature and earth. And then the figure within, holding its arms up, of course, mimics me, and the main image that you see on my website, and across the headers of all my social media feeds. And I had another question actually about that specifically. Why that header? Because it looks like I'm raising my hands to God in a very traditional way that you might see in charismatic churches. Actually, that was shot on a day that I was doing another project for photo class that I was taking, and I really just liked it because there's a tree in the background. To me, it's reaching out to nature, reaching to the sky, and that was actually the theme of the photo shoot itself, was reaching to the sky. So I chose that image specifically for that. There was another question that was sent to me about anonymity and how I view that, and if I treat myself as an anonymous person by calling myself the Agnostic Addict, what does that mean about anonymity if I'm still willing to show my face? Well, I don't believe in hiding behind some sort of persona, and I believe face-to-face contact creates a sense of community, trust, and in building that relationship, I think it's important to have that face-to-face contact, and being able to see me is important to me. Now, I take everyone who comes to my website or who talks to me through social media or who might send me messages, I take their anonymity and privacy very, very it's very important to me, and it's serious. I take it seriously. If you check out the privacy tab on my website, you'll see all the steps that I've taken and some recommendations about keeping your privacy secure. I want to make your experience as safe as possible when you come to my website and interact with me, and that includes the forums. Thank you for the question. So one of the reasons, actually one of the biggest reasons that I created the website and did the project overall was because I felt that there was something missing in the majority of traditional 12-step groups, and that was inclusion of those who don't have a spirituality that is exactly the same as everyone else. There's very few admitted agnostics in a lot of 12-step groups, and I've also talked with people who have left 12-step groups and walked out of meetings because the God language can be so heavy, and that saddens me a lot because I feel that we've let those addicts down by allowing them to leave the room because the language can be so distracting sometimes from the core purpose, and the core purpose is recovery. And I wanted to reach people in a way that they could still work recovery if they were turned off by 12-step groups, if they are, let's say, remote and there aren't a lot of recovery options available to them where they're located. So I'm trying to include as many possible resources on my website that could help them. So on my resources tab, you can find worksheets for step 1, 2, and 3. And I have modified all of them to remove the traditional God language and made them very generic so that they work for any addiction across the board. And there was a second part to that question. What was that? I think it was, who do I hope to reach? Actually, I think I just answered that. So, yeah, reaching those who are scared to come to a meeting, who maybe need that little push to get them into a meeting, or maybe they just want information and they are not at a point of hitting bottom yet, but they're seeking answers. Excuse me. And to give them some tools and resources, as well as links to the AA book that's free and available online to read, and just to, excuse me, be a platform, someplace where they can go, where anybody can go, any addict, whether they're agnostic or not. And I did have another question that was emailed to me that I want to clarify. It was, being an agnostic, how can I still believe in spirituality? Well, I think that many people, especially in America, who have very traditional ideals, think that being an agnostic is being an atheist. And that's just not true. An atheist is someone who does not believe in anything at all, and believes that when we die, that's it. We turn to goo in the earth, and that's the end of our lives. An agnostic is someone who believes in something and just doesn't really know where to put their finger on it. So for me, I've spoken or wrote a lot and spoken on my post site postings the difficulty I have with the traditional ideals of Christianity that I grew up in. And so what I had to do in order to make the program work for me was find a God that works for me. a God of my understanding. And the God of my understanding happens or is present when I speak to people and when we speak our real truth with each other, like what happens in a meeting room, or when I share the posts that I share, sharing my experience, strength, and hope, when I'm outside and when I'm connecting with nature, and when I go sit in a coffee shop to do homework, and there's people all around me, and I'm a part of that social circle and network at that time. I may not be talking with them, but just being present. To me, that is a sense of spirituality. I do believe that there is a spirit within me. I call it energy, and I believe that energy does not it does not end when we die, and I don't really have an answer for what happens after death with that energy, but I don't need to, because that's in the head. Very good question. So yes, the website is obviously very branded towards me being the agnostic, but that's only my name and how I branded the website. The website, though, is for any addict, period, whether they believe in a traditional God, whether they are any religion in the world, frankly, because I've made the worksheet so generic and I share my experiences in such a generic way. I'm very honest in sharing my experiences, but they don't include that God aspect, because everyone deserves a chance to find their own God of their understanding, whether they're Christian, whether they're Muslim, Hindu, whatever, Jewish, it doesn't matter. Especially when you take a look at the worksheets and download them, you can put in to the placeholder what your God is. And that's how I have structured all of those worksheets, is however you define your spirituality, that's what you can fill in the blank on all of those worksheets. And so my website is a tool for everybody, regardless of who they are and where they come from and what they believe. I did get another question emailed to me as well. How long have I been an addict and when did it begin? Well, there are a couple of posts about this, and sometimes it's hard for people to understand and believe that addiction can start so early. I was an addict for 28 years, a practicing addict, and it started for me in 7th grade. Now, how did I get access? Those kind of details aren't important. In fact, that's a good thing to share as well too. I don't share those kind of details in my postings because one of the biggest dangers that can happen when you're speaking in a group setting or posting in the way that I do and I'm sharing my story is something I may say, or if I call out a specific drug or a specific compulsion or specific activities, those can trigger other addicts. And so I'm very, very careful about what I say, what I post, and specific details because those can be triggering, and I don't want to trigger anybody. And so that's also part of the reason why I put at the end of every single one of my posts that I am simply sharing my own experience, strength, and hope. I am not a therapist or a guru, and that's it. So what steps do you follow to help you through? And which steps have helped the most? That's a great question as well. So I am currently working on step 6 in my step study group. And I think the hardest and most important step for me was the 4th step, where you start to inventory all of your defaults of character. And then in step 5, you have to admit those defaults to yourself and to another person and be willing to give them up. Some people call that giving it up to a God. For me, it's releasing it, saying it to someone else, and by saying it, it takes the power away from that defect. That's the effect it has on me, is when I share honestly about a flaw that I have and a weakness and a struggle, that takes the power away from that struggle and that weakness and that flaw. Yes, exactly. So the fourth step was the most important to me, and one that I think I have to reference almost every single day, because we're always faced. It doesn't matter addict or not. We're always faced with struggles that we have to get through. You know, we can fly off the handle and get upset with the kids or the husband or with ourselves or with the dog. And it's so easy to yell, or, you know, just driving home on the freeways, it can be a nightmare. And we scream and curse in our cars at those, you know, people passing by us. You know, constantly being aware of those character flaws, and cataloging them in my head, and then thinking about them, and I jot them down and try and remember to release them and breathe. And it's not my fault that someone cut me off, and it's not my fault, you know, if someone else made me angry. Or I'm sorry, it's not their fault that someone made me angry. That's my fault. I have to own it. I have to own those emotions and feelings and those struggles and those flaws and weaknesses. And so by owning them and taking responsibility for them, I can learn by them and grow. So that is the step that's most important to me. So back to the last question, how long an addict? So I talked about that 28 years. When did it begin? 7th grade was when it began, and that was 12 years old, if you can believe that. And Lauren, hello, thank you for joining. I am currently taking questions. I've got some written down that I've received from others. If you have any questions, specific questions you'd like to ask, feel free. You can also tap the screen to send me hearts. And that also boosts my presence on the Periscope channel. What do I do about fears and fear of going back to old habits? Oh, that's an excellent question. You know, there are a lot of times that I have fear. I would say that's almost a daily thing as well. I was terrified to even do this broadcast. I didn't know if I wanted to open myself up that much to literally the World Wide Web. The entire world could log into this right now if they wanted to. But how I face those fears is knowing how much I've accomplished already and how much I've faced. There's, you know, I may say that I'm terrified about something, or a presentation at school terrifies me, or am I talented enough to go get a job after I graduate? Yeah, all those things scare me, but then I also think about all the things and the hurdles that I've overcome, and that reminds me that those fears are just a part of that limbic beast in my head that's always in overdrive. And how do I keep from going back to old habits and patterns is I don't let myself get into those old patterns. So for instance, I shared in a post about the witching hour, and that is how I would start using a lot around midnight. And for some reason or another, the cover of Dark empowered the addict and the disease, and it just reared its ugly head then. So I try and force myself to go to sleep, unless I'm up, you know, doing a report or presentation for the next day and working on that all night. But I try not to stay up just for the point of staying up, because if I do, that can slip me into those old habits. Also, one of the most important tools for me was creating what I call the circles. So on my website, under the resources tab, you can find a worksheet called the circles. And what that is in the outer circle, those are all the good things that you want to be doing in your life. So I filled it with a whole bunch of good things. And I made categories for different areas of my life that I could do stuff in. So if I get to a point where I am just sitting idle and I don't have anything to do, which is a dangerous point that I could easily slip back into old patterns, I've always got a wealth of things that I can turn to because I've written them all out. On that circles worksheet, the middle circle area, those are all the things that I need to stay aware of. And they are things that could trigger me to slip right back down into the inner circle area, which is where you list your drug of choice, whether it be alcohol, whether it be drugs, etc. How do you know if you're an addict or just a normal level of action that isn't an addiction? Great question. So when I knew I was an addict, which on some conscious level I knew for a very, very long time before I hit bottom, my life was complete chaos. I knew when the drug of choice becomes your God and dictates your actions, and you revolve your entire life around when you can use and get access to that, that's when it's a pretty good bet that something's going on, and that probably needs to be addressed. A lot of people use terms these days called compulsions. That's a good point. Like I said, I think a lot of people use the terminology this day called compulsions, and they try and deal with those issues either through seeing a therapist or just staying away from those kinds of things. So that doesn't bother me. Initially, yeah, it was worrisome to be around people who might still be using. Over the course of recovery and now spending almost 3 years being clean and sober, I don't have a problem with it. It's sort of like being a vegan and sitting next to someone in the restaurant who orders meat. I'm not gonna go all up in arms about it or start any sort of rhetoric or political campaigning. Everyone has the right to choose what they do, and it doesn't bother me sitting next to someone who might be drinking, and I don't have any fear of it because I know where my strength is. So we're getting to the last 5 minutes of the broadcast. Do we have any other questions? I have, I do not know what benzos are, Western Voice. Oh, do I take benzos? Okay, so along with working on addiction, yes. As I cleared up the unmanageable life, I did discover that there were other things I had to deal with. So most of my life, I have been clinically depressed, and I do take Pamelar for that, 75 milligrams a day. And I also have borderline personality disorder, which that combined with the problem of addiction, it made it almost next to impossible for me to see right from wrong. Everything was always gray. Opposite. Switch that. It either was one way or the other. And most of the time, I viewed things in the wrong way. I couldn't see that there was a middle ground. Being an addict, a lot of addicts are extremely selfish. So if it wasn't my way or done my way, then bye-bye. And so that causes a lot of isolation. And for the borderline personality, I do take Lamictal, 300 milligrams a day, and it really helps with that focus. Another thing it does that it helps with is a lot of addicts in recovery talk about how over the course of especially in that first year of recovery, a lot of ruminations go on in the head, or you remember all the good old days of when you used to use, and it becomes very seductive to you, and it can pull you back. That's one thing that can pull you back into sliding, which is another reason why I try not to trigger people with details when I share. But the Lamictal that I use for the borderline personality disorder, that helps a lot with those ruminations, and thoughts just don't stick like that. No, I am not a diabetic. Any more questions? That's actually a really good question. How do I handle being an addict with someone who isn't? Well, it was a struggle. I can't tell you how many times that I thought the relationship was going to end, and it was very, very close to. In fact, when I hit bottom, we were living in separate bedrooms until the lease on our house was up, and then we were going to split. That was it. But I was given one final chance, and after I began to work, it took a lot of trust. It takes a lot of trust. So how I build that up is only in my actions. That's all I can do, and by proving that I'm sticking to the program. So thank you, Too Late, for asking that question. An agnostic is not an atheist. I believe that there is something to our spirituality and who we are, our soul, our essence, that we have an energy, and when we connect with others, that energy is amplified, and when we share honestly, it's really great and intense, and I think that's a spiritual moment. No, at this point in my life, and for a while now, I do not believe in a single God or entity out there, or master creator, whatever you want to call it. No, I do not. And everyone has their own definition of and understanding of higher power, and that's the whole point of finding a God of your understanding. The God of my understanding is interacting with other people, having a true and honest connection, being authentic, living a life that treats others with respect, and treating myself with respect. And to me, that is a part of my spiritual makeup, along with nature and being outdoors, connecting with the earth, and that's my makeup. I appreciate the prayers. Feel free. My parents pray for me all the time, they say, so that's great. I appreciate them, and I don't deny anyone their own faith. So we've got just a couple more minutes before we wrap up this broadcast. Is there any final questions that you would like to ask of me? All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody for joining me today. Thank you for logging in and asking these really great questions. One last question. So, yes, in fact, I grew up in an extremely Christian and religious household. We were Baptist. We went to church 4 times a week. Everything that we did, all of our friends, families that we interacted with, were all a part of our church group. Everything was regulated at home. TV was monitored. The music we listened to. I grew up where we all sat around the dining room table every single night of the week and had dinner together. Back then, of course, because I'm 43, we didn't have cell phones or people tapping on tablets or the TV going on, and everybody eating on the couch and grabbing a plate or going off to their own rooms. I have extremely religious parents still. And for me, that's just a decision that when I moved out and I became an adult, I questioned everything. And right now, as I'm seeking recovery and looking at my own life, I question the existence of anything else other than my spiritual beliefs that I've already stated. So, but I love them, and they have the right to believe what they do believe, and that's wonderful. I appreciate that. Thank you. Too late for love. That's always a kind comment. But I am pretty set in my ways, and this is my belief in my strength. So it is now 2:31, and we are going to wrap this up. I really appreciate everyone logging in and asking me, the Agnostic Addict, questions. This went fairly well. I will be doing this once a month, and if I keep on getting a following, I will continue to do this and maybe even bump it up to a couple times a month. I will be recording the session and posting it on my website, and on my YouTube channel. I will be creating a Periscope channel so that these are saved and you can view them for later viewing. Thank you everyone for joining, and goodbye.